Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to New York Exchange Online. I'm Cindy Sissoko, and I'm the curator and special projects producer here. Thank you for joining us today for the panel discussion, Cut and Mix, Black Masculinities in the 21st Century. Cut and Mix is a group exhibition curated by Ian Sergeant that interrogates and challenges notions of race, gender, sexualities, class, place, and identities in relation to Black British masculinities. The exhibition creates a dialogue between past, present, and future representations. The exhibition features work by 7 Black British artists, spanning from photography to film and from installation to drawings that defy stereotypical representation to make space for playfulness, joy, the multiplicity of being, and vulnerability. Cut and Mix also seeks for a reflection about the future and the radical imagination that evolves and takes place today when thinking about Black British masculinities. So you are welcome to come and see the exhibition before it ends on the Saturday, 8th of January. Ian Sergeant will be chairing a conversation with Cut and Mix artists Beverley Bennett and Amartey Golding, as well as All Black Connect's members, Chantelle, Fagan-Clarke, and James Denham. Before we start, I want to go through some housekeeping notes. So while delivering content online, NE strives to create a safe and secure environment, where guests, staff, and audiences can work together, confidently and in mutual respect. The event is being recorded and will remain online for future reference. To ask questions during the Q&A, you can use the chat function on YouTube. If there are a lot of questions, we will curate them for our guests. And of course, do feel free to talk to one another using the chat feature as well. And finally, we'd love to hear any feedback from you. Towards the end of the event, we'll post a link to the online survey on the chat, If you could please take a few minutes to complete this short survey, it will really help us. And now, without further ado, Ian, Beverley, Amartey, Chantelle, and James, welcome.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you. And yeah, welcome everybody. Hello, everybody. Okay, so I'm Ian Sergeant, and on my left is Beverley Bennett.
Hi.
Amartey Golding.
Hello.
Chantelle Fagan-Clarke. Hello. James Denham.
Hi.
So we're going to get into it in a bit, I've got a few questions that I want to ask of the artists and of the. Are you activists?
I guess we.
But we'll come to that.
Yeah.
Are you activists? That's a strange word, but we'll get into that a bit later. But I also then I'd kind of it's a participatory process. But I wanted to kind of kick off with this idea of why cut and mix. Why cut and mix? So the idea of cut and mix comes from a wider aspect of my research into this exhibition, but also in terms of my practice in general as a curator researcher. So cut and mix comes from this idea around hybrid identities. But also it stems from my research, my interest in the Black Art Group, a group of artists from the late 70s and early 1980s based in the West Midlands. And it's a description that the art historian Cabena Mercer uses to describe their practice of collage, of bringing together different materials, found objects, and other materials, and in that kind of avant-garde kind of countercultural kind of protest. So he kind of described their practice as a cut and mix aesthetic. So within my research itself, I wanted to kind of bring that idea, that methodology into my practice, because I use these different methods. So I use autoethnographic research and kind of critical reflection of myself, and then ethnographic research around black men, talking to black men through social engagement, so using that other method, and then practice-based research in terms of this, curating this exhibition. So kind of cutting and mixing between those different methods. So that's how the idea for the title. But then it also, this idea of cut and mix also represents this the idea of hybrid identities. So if we're thinking of you know, how that idea of black and British cultures have evolved and where they've evolved, emanated from, whether it be from the Caribbean or from Africa or Europe or what have you. So it's all these kind of diasporic understandings of identities as well. So that whole notion of curtain mix, it also relates to, you know, Stuart Hall kind of talks about this idea of hybrid identities and that new ethnicities come into being through that process. So that's why this title kind of came about, Curtain Mix, for the exhibition. So my curatorial intention has been to create a conceptual provocation of what Black British masculinities might mean in the 21st century. The story which is told through the curatorial act and action of selection and assembling and then interpreting work and then putting it together next to each other and that kind of conversation that's existing between those works. But then, like, the intention is also to kind of leave some space for the audience to, for their own interpretations, because we all kind of bring in our own lived experiences into this space, so we'll kind of interpret the work in a particular way. So it's always kind of leaving that space for that to happen. So the intention is, as the introduction suggests, is to challenge preconceptions and pathologies of what Black British masculinities is, and that kind of the pathologies of Black British masculinities past and present, that historical fixity of what blackness as an identity is. And then, you know, in terms of what Cabana Mercer talks about of the late 70s, 80s, or even the 1970s, that the idea of Britishness not being able to be conjoined with blackness, or blackness being conjoined with Britishness. So they were never able to kind of be brought together. So that identity was a difficult thing to find and to claim historically. And I think maybe that still is a thing which we probably will get into in a bit in our conversations. So it's about that. But also then is to kind of challenge some of that idea of the essentialized notion, or the fixed idea of what blackness is, that essentialized idea of blackness, that either it emanates only from the Caribbean, or that when we're talking about blackness, are we invariably talking about black men? And then in doing so, then do we obfuscate women within that conversation, or do we obfuscate queer identities within that? You know, so that there's that dominance and that idea of, well, you know, if we're in a patriarchal society or structured patriarchal society, there is that suggestion then that the masculine identities are the dominant ones, and essentially then within that then there is this idea then that at the top of that structure is perhaps whiteness is that dominant kind of hegemonic kind of character in that regard. So kind of wanted to kind of interrogate some of those understandings or concepts really. So that's what this session is about. And I'm, you know, hoping that with a few questions to each of you as artists in terms of the work that you've created or recreated or repurposed for this exhibition, and then as an organisation, how you've, you know, taken tools or gotten involved in the process, or from your interpretations of what you've experienced, and from what, you know, people that you've kind of shown the exhibition to, what have been their reactions to that work. And it's, again, as I said, the intention is always, this is open to interpretation. As a curator, I've only come with it from my understanding. And there's a myriad of other ways in which this, with identities can be, just thinking of the idea of black masculinities, Black British masculinities in the 21st century. What does that mean then? If we're thinking about that, and I'm perhaps going to not go straight into the first questions, but just in terms of, does that mean that we're only talking about people that are born as millennials, So that then doesn't apply to me because I'm born in the last century. I was born in the last century. So if that idea of what it means, you know, black masculinities in the 21st century, if I could just throw that out first just as a provocation, what does it suggest to you? Because as I said, it might not necessarily mean anything. It's more, does it apply more to the generation of now, of people that are growing up, you know, in the new millennium, as opposed to people that were born before, you know, 2000? What do people think of that idea? Just as a little provocation first.
I mean, I don't think it's you know, as rigid as saying that when we're speaking about 21st century masculinity, that it has to just relate to people from, you know, who are born from the year 2000 onwards. I think, you know, masculinity is shaped by the world around it, and if you were born, you know, in the previous century, you can be fluid, and you're going to be you know, the way that you view and perform your masculinity is going to be representative of the culture that you're within, and that is always constantly changing and always constantly fluid. Like language is always constantly developing. You may have been born in, I don't know, 1982, for example, but you might not be using the same slang that people were using of that time. You're always constantly adapting. So I don't think it's as simple as saying having a cut-off point. Although we're talking about the 21st century specifically, you know, masculinity is always shifting and changing, at least the way that I see it, yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else want to add to that?
I definitely really agree with that. I guess something that maybe is like dissolving, but also like reappearing and like redefining itself constantly. And in ways that it's kind of already existed, but it's kind of like now I feel like, I don't know, I suppose as we're more aware of like intergenerational trauma, I feel like conversations are shifting, and like I'm queer, I'm genderqueer, and the way that I experience my kind of gender identity is informed by that intergenerational trauma, but is also like me healing that and then like moving beyond that and taking it into the future. So I think like in a way it's quite like a futuristic thing maybe now, I don't know.
No, that's good. I think that's a fair point. Anybody else want to add to that conversation initially before we get down to it?
Yeah, I kind of agree with both points really. Just the way in which the world evolves, language evolves, other people have different theories and different takes on it, and it's kind of like it's up to you how you interpret it. As long as it's not harming anyone else, you kind of have that ownership.
You're good.
You know what, I'm trying to like pace myself.
That's cool.
I know that if I start now...
No, that's cool. All right, well, I'm going to come to you first anyway. Amartey Golding, multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary...
I think multi sounds a bit nicer, yeah.
Multi. So in the exhibition, we have installation, we've got photography, we've got drawing, we've got film. So part of that, what I wanted to ask was, through that body of work that we have in the exhibition, is it fair to say that...
What are you going to say?
Let me get to it.
Right, yeah.
Is it, no, because it seems as if you're searching for something through the work that you've created, that body of work. So, if so, what is, you know, because if we're talking about masculinities and identities, then what search and what quest are you on then within that?
Wow. I guess I'm searching for myself, which I don't know if that's ever going to... I guess as an artist, you're doing that, right? You're exploring ways to understand the world around you. And I think, I don't know, I guess with my practice, it starts from the outside in. So, you know, with every project, I feel like I'm getting deeper a little bit more into who I am. So, you know, my first few films, so, you know, you got Chainmail, which is the first film.
Yeah.
I guess maybe subconsciously or maybe a little bit consciously as well at the time, it was like, yeah, I'm seen as a black man. I was very frustrated. I was living in Brighton at the time. There was just a lot to deal with, like how I am perceived in the world, you know, and then how I want to engage with that idea of how I'm perceived. So, and for me, I never felt comfortable with just being able to have, to feel victimized by something, you know. And so that was, you know, Chainmail 1 was the first time where I was able to implicate myself properly in my work and say, okay, and I think one thing that's quite exciting about black men or black masculinity is that, yes, you're victimized, but you're right bang in the middle as a perpetrator and a victim, as that identity, if you know what I mean. You've got power, but you've also got a lot of vulnerability. And for me, that's really quite exciting, you know.
So for those that haven't seen Chainmail 1, because there's 3 films that you've made, and part of that the costume that is worn is part in the exhibition. But in Chainmail 1, it's a dance performance, and it the soundtrack that you use for this track is a very controversial track. At the time that when the track came out, it's Buju Banton's Boom Bye Bye, very controversial track. And what I wanted to ask then was, what was the balance that you were looking to, or how were you looking to kind of create a provocation by using that track with the performance of you? It's your brother. In a ballet performance, in this kind of almost kind of arena dancehall, this kind of space that you don't know where the space is, but it felt like a dancehall. But it also felt like an arena, like you know, you kind of stepping into the ring almost.
And Fight Club.
I was going to say the same thing. It's like being in Fight Club.
Fight Club.
That's what it felt to me when I watched the film.
So tell us a bit about that and how and because it does. Yeah, sorry, I'll let you explain. Yeah.
All right then. So there's so many things there in it. That's a big one. But yeah, so basically, so my brother's gay, and he's an incredible dancer. He's now left the ballet, but I guess I've grown up as a Rastafarian and a lot around Jamaican culture, and that was something that I felt gave me a lot of direction, helped me process a lot of what I was dealing with. I grew up for a period of time as a young person in Cambridge as well, very white area. And there was a lot that I was coming across, and Jamaican culture and Rastafarian kind of doctrines and perspectives on things really gave me structure in how to understand it and know that it was something that would pass, and, you know, gave me the tools to manage that and that self-esteem, that cultural self-esteem that I needed. But at the same time, there's a lot of extremely problematic elements for that. And I didn't want to talk about it, like I said, you know, only from a victim mindset. I wanted to look, and where I get excited is like how I can be implicated and, you know, offering space to. So instead of saying, oh, you're doing this to me, let me talk to you about that, it's more me looking at what am I doing to other people as well. You know, there's something empowering about that. So yeah, you know, Boom Bye Bye was a track that when I was growing up, everybody knew. It was just normal, it was just played everywhere, any barbecue you went to. And I think it was a moment of reflection, just revisiting growing up and thinking, must it have been like for my brother in that environment? You know, our dad died before Solomon was able to come out as well. So there was a lot of kind of layers and implication, because when I listened to the track, and for me, this was this was my first film, right? I'd never been on a film set before. I knew this project needed to be a film. And so when I heard this track and when I was listening to this track, it was in my playlist at the time. It wasn't just a purely artistic, you know, thought experiment. It was like, I'm listening to this track. What does this mean? You know, I'm so desensitized to what it's saying. I know what it's saying, I understand the lyrics, but I'm also desensitized to it. But I'm creating an extremely violent environment around me when I'm doing that. And so for me, it was that nostalgia that I have to that track. And even now, I know how disgusting it is, and it's calling for the violent destruction of my brother, who I love very much. But it still resonates with me when I hear the beat. I still nod my head, and that was very interesting for me. You know, the role of nostalgia in a lot of these violent processes, and it blurs the line a bit. Again, it brings it to this weird contradictory element where you've got something like nostalgia when we're all growing up, and we're all you know, our loved ones that maybe aren't even with us today, those memories kind of program us. And then a lot of the violence that we do is from a place of nostalgia and happiness for our own memories that were programmed, you know, kind of against someone else. So yeah, working with my brother, who's an incredible ballet dancer and gay, and kind of, yeah, acknowledging my role in some of his traumas and some of his struggles, as well as being able to acknowledge my own as a black man.
Yeah. But it could, and because with that idea then of the dancehall track and dancehall culture, how it is perceived as very violent, masculinized, sexualized space, then it's interesting to see that you've used those kind of reference points to really kind of challenge and challenge our own perceptions and your own perception.
Myself, yeah,
yourself
exactly.
within that.
Exactly.
Within that.
Yeah.
And I think that the issue around that path, you know, we're going back to this idea around masculinities, that dancehall culture is how a lens through which blackness and masculinity has been viewed for a long time. It's kind of, okay, this is that violent culture, and it comes from that. Yeah. And I think that's why I find that piece so challenging and so interesting, because you've asked us all then to kind of confront our you know, our sometimes our limitations, our perceptions. But then also, I think it also it's a challenge to society in general in its perception of dancehall culture, because I know there are people that will defend dancehall culture, and women will, you know, especially for women. I went to see that play Run It Back in London recently. Is it Talamar? And that whole kind of reclamation of the space for women and queer identities within that space, I think it's really important. And so I think by doing that work through chainmail, and because you do a thing with the soundtrack that you bring it right down so that you can hear every syllable, and it makes it even more painful
for those who know
the lyrics.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's like, okay, this is so. It is. You kind of slowly go through this thing, and you know there is. You get a sense of burden when someone's putting on the weight of the chainmail.
Yeah. Yeah, I think also, just to say, like, when I first started showing it, the first time we showed it, like, in public, it was at the London Art Fair, and a lot of people from the black community, a lot of black men and black women who grew up listening to the track, the first thing they did was start to nod their heads, and then they realised, actually, you know what I mean? So again, it's ticking into that nostalgia and implicating anyone who has that same, you know, history and experience. But also one thing is that when a lot of people watch the films, they see the black, you know, hyper-masculine dancehall environment, and then they see the ballet, and they feel like those are complete opposites. Yeah. But for me, how I was understanding it is, you know, the way that I was raised, or at least, you know, as a Rasta, understanding the violence that's in the worlds of ballet and that colonialist, like, you know, white kind of Eurocentric space. For me, I've always seen that as a very violent and hyper-masculine space, very overly sexualized and very prescriptive in the way that genders are played out in there. So for me, it was trying to find the similarities in these seemingly separate worlds and implicate us all in that, you know what I mean? But also, each one of them is beautiful. Like, dancehall is wicked, you know, and so is ballet, but they're all also quite toxic. Yeah.
No, it is. Because I just thinking about that relationship with your brother, because I was thinking earlier on today, I can't remember what I was, can't remember what I was listening to, but it was this idea of you know, coming out, because you know, you said that and it's a really bizarre, for me, you know, I'm a heterosexual male, but this idea of coming out, I just find a really bizarre thing in this, let alone in this day and age, but this because we're in a society that assumes a person's identity as being heteronormative until they come out or identify as, it's like, well, why do we have to go through this process of revealing ourselves to somebody? It's a really bizarre thing, and so, but you know, I was just interested to hear about you saying that your brother wasn't able to kind of share that with your father before he passed away. But I just find it is I don't know if anybody has anything to say about that idea of around identities that have to be revealed in this kind of ritualistic way now in society.
Just a quick note on that, because I think some other people here probably have more experience on that for me, but when you explain it like that someone has to reveal themselves, for me it just focuses on what the society is, how blind it is to not be able to see someone for who they are anyway, that you have to come out and say, I have to reveal myself because you weren't seen that whole time. You know, it's interesting because when Solomon did have this, this coming out thing and told mum, and then mum told everyone, everyone was like, yeah, of course, like, you know, it makes sense now. You know, like, of course, like, everyone knew that without knowing it or needing to know it in that way, if you know what I mean. Which was interesting, but I
don't know. Do you have any? I'm not. In no way am I. It's about this idea of of having to reveal yourself, because you described yourself as
genderqueer.
Genderqueer. Was that a thing for that you needed to have to? You felt you needed to, or was people?
It's something that, in certain spaces, I feel I have to say to negate whatever assumptions people are making of me, like from the get-go. It's like, I think, it's a really complicated thing, and it's a thing that you don't really do once. It's a process, it's a ongoing thing that's constantly happening. And also for how you experience, like, your gender might change over time as well. So even that, it's almost like you're doing that with yourself and everyone else around you. I think it's interesting describing it as like a ritual.
Because what the reason why I'm kind of touching on that is, like, one of the works, a body of work within the exhibition is Rotimi Fani-Kayode. And Rotimi, of Nigerian heritage, from a middle-class family, Yoruba culture. And he is, his queer black gay identity, described himself as a black gay photographer, but his parents' idea of him was that he was going to be, become a married man, do all these kind of, the formal, in that heteronormative sense, going to go down this route. And he was completely opposite. He came to the UK via New York and, got involved in a range of activities that then brought out his artistic practices. But then he goes back to his Yoruba culture to mine that history, mine that mythology, then to in the work that he produces. But then his experience has been that he was at times rejected by the black community or disavowed by the white art galleries, places like Photo Gallery, what have you, saying, no, actually, we don't want or need your work.
Not dealing with that.
We're not dealing with that. But the reason why I selected Fani-Kayode's work for this show was to provide that space within the exhibition for that conversation around sexualities or constructions, conversations around constructs around sexuality and gender to take place, but also then to challenge the idea of blackness, that it only emanates from one place. When we're talking about blackness in Britain, we're talking about it from a particular perspective, and Fani-Kayode's work enables that, because before Fani-Kayode's work, we had the Black Art Group, which was essentially an African Caribbean collective in terms of their heritages. So his work is that pivotal shift, and I see a relationship between the work in Chainmail and in some of in some of that garlanded and some of those images, that because of what Fagan-Clarke uses. So I don't know whether you knew of his work or practiced beforehand, but I was certainly interested in that and that was the kind of conversation that I wanted to see between those works. I think Fagan-Clarke's work doesn't it provides that space and that for that conversation to start to happen. So you have Fagan-Clarke, then Isaac Julian, Marlon Riggs, a range of other artists that started to kind of flourish in and around that 80s. If we're kind of thinking about the time that we're in terms of the pandemic, we can think of like what the 80s was in terms of the AIDS epidemic at the time. So so not only was the AIDS epidemic rife, it was also then that how black communities and where it originated from, again, being stigmatized, black bodies being stigmatized within that kind of understanding of it. Sorry, I'm going off on a bit of a rant. I need to kind of reel myself in.
Can I say something?
Certainly.
Can we go back to nostalgia?
Certainly.
Could you talk more about it? I've been like hanging on to that, especially with your film, with the character that's wearing the hair, and there's an innocence with them with regards to that, and how does that link into nostalgia? I'm just trying to like process it, and that's to you actually.
Go on. This is good.
Yeah, to be honest, I guess for me, I always like to look for a more nuanced approach to how we can all be kind of, brought together or unified. And I know that for me, growing up, a lot of the ideas of, again, from learning from a Rastafarian point of view of why certain things have happened, understanding colonialism, understanding people torn away from their culture, losing it, missing it, and all the violence that you might be exposed to on a daily basis in the UK, like when it comes to race or anything else really. For a long time, I didn't know how to understand it. Like, where does it come from? We've got a lot of binary ideas of good and bad people, and a racist person is just bad, or and even though we know better than that, we always, a framework just never. I was looking for answers anyway, and as I would ask people, I'd speak to a lot of people when I was in Cambridge or when I was in Brighton, a lot of people who maybe were obviously racist or obviously whatever. And also relate to myself, like in the film, trying to understand where I'm involved and implicated in a lot of violence and nostalgia. And a lot of people have, so for example, the obvious thing, gollywogs, right? Mm. This is an easy example. One of the biggest kind of defenses of it when people are fighting for it is, but I grew up when I was a little girl, I used to have my gollywog and my gran gave it to me, and all of those memories of being a child, being safe, when everything was carefree, and your granny, who you'll never see again, she can't be a bad person because she was giving me a gollywog, and all of this stuff. And nostalgia kind of allows people to hold on and fight for things and keep expressing things that are actually quite violent. And I think that can go to a lot of things. So in other films, I use crisps a lot because when you're a kid, you get your little snacks and stuff, and it's all that nostalgia. But, for me, being able to, like I don't know what you call candy business or the sweet business, those multi-billion-dollar things that are destroying so many people's health and involved in arms dealing and, this kind of capitalist project, which is so violent, but all in this innocent little crisp that we grow up and, even the idea of, comfort eating and all that. It's all bad stuff a lot of the time. It's stuff that in the long term, you don't actually, if you could choose in your life, if you had an overview, you probably wouldn't do it. But because of the nostalgia, because of those attachments to positive memories and experiences, a lot of kind of violence can come from that. And I just thought that was interesting, like such beautiful rose-tinted memories create conditions that can destroy so many people and yourself.
Because I think you show that, you show it quite subtly through the film. Like that particular character, there's an absolute beauty and a kind of innocence within their eyes as they evolve, as they go through the piece, and then obviously you see them evolve and change and realise certain things. I just think the way in which you were able to capture it was just beautiful, really.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
It was just mesmerising.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I agree. Now that you've asked that question, I'll come back to you, because I'll come back to you a bit later on. But I kind of wanted to bring you in then, Beverley, really, and because that same with you. You're a multidisciplinary artist, and I wanted to kind of give you a bit of space then to talk a bit about your practice, and then how we got to the point of the performance that we see in the space currently with the exhibition. So do you want to say a bit about your background and your practice? Can you do that for us?
You know that I don't want to, but I will.
I know.
So multidisciplinary artist. I like to work with people, different groups up and down the UK. Sometimes I do performances by myself. Sometimes I draw. So lots of different things depending on what I'm trying to search for within a work. So sometimes works can take a short period of time. Sometimes they can take many years. And I'm still in the process of one of them.
Okay.
Yeah. So
is that, and because I don't want to kind of preempt some of the things, but it was like, so that durational process then, is that because of how, is it in response to time itself, or is that because of budgetary? I don't know. What is that in response to? Could you be a bit more? Time,
budgets. Also trying to build relationships with who I work with, whether it's people or institutions. To kind of figure things out and go through that process.
Because for me to get to the exhibition, much of the exhibition was informed through social engagement, having conversations with black men, with kind of sitting in a room, sharing their experiences, different age range, sexualities, identities. And it was through that conversation then that the exhibition started to kind of take shape. Without that, I wouldn't, it would have been really difficult. But it's that lived experience that those works kind of speak to. And I think you as individual artists kind of have that referential point of lived experience of talking about something and then it coming out in your work. So do you find that social engagement as a real important, and how does it work for you in that regard then? What is it about that contact with communities and people in that way?
I'm nosy. I'm really nosy. And I don't know, I just enjoy working with people and having conversations with them, trying to figure out how we could work together and just learn, really.
Yeah.
Like sometimes I do what's traditionally known as workshops, but I call them gatherings because I don't like that hierarchy. I do gatherings, and sometimes I always say, I'm gonna learn more from you than you learn from me. So that's like my kind of get out clause. But I'm just really interested in people's stories, stories that I have within myself, and I'm trying to unpick them. And I've been really fortunate that a number of individuals have been happy to go on a particular journey with me through making work. So
cool. And then in getting into, because I experienced the performance, I'm calling it that, even though it doesn't have a title. I'm calling it the performance because that's how I remember it. I experienced it live. I was in, when it was at Eastside in 2019, was it? Or was it early 2020? I can't remember.
No, maybe 2019.
2019, wasn't it? I think. And to experience it live was the thing, because the performance in the space, how the voices fill the space, and all the gestures, all that kind of movement, everything, you got that, and then something happened.
No, but there's more than that. It's not just their voices filling that space. It's also the audience who come, the energies that they bring. It's like when you go to a concert. It's just
or you go to when you go to a concert. But I likened it to there was something, there's that church thing as well.
Yeah.
Church is there, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So you got this church thing going on in that performance, and I think some, if not all of them, come from church as well. So so that's again, and that's what I found fascinating then, that marriage of church and secular cultures coming together. And was that a difficult thing for them to kind of bargain with, or was that just a natural process anyway? That's okay.
Yeah, I think it was a natural process. It's like, I don't know. Sometimes people go to New York. I've done this once. Gone to New York, you go to a Baptist church because their singing is just incredible. You go as a tourist. You go right up into the eaves, and then you just hear the band play, and you hear their voices. And maybe within what we had done at Eastside, an incredibly smaller version. But yeah, when you're saying like people who aren't from the church going to witness and take part and enjoy themselves in a way and still be taken by the message in the music.
And for those that haven't seen it, then because you've chosen 3 songs. Anita Baker, Sweet Love, Phyllis Hyman, Meet Me on the Moon.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the other two.
Oh my gosh. Deborah Cox.
Nobody's
supposed to be here.
Yeah. So, 3 tracks by female artists sung by men. Was that what was the thinking? Why did you choose those? Was those particular tracks a reason behind that then? What was the thinking?
Thinking, well, I come from a big family. There's lots of us basically. And one of my older brothers at the time, when I was growing up, he used to play lots of R&B music all the time in the house, and it'd just be blasting out all the time. And I remember him playing these songs, but during the exhibition at Eastside, it's called The Range, curated by Rahana Zaman, you were invited to do an event, and I had made a short piece, and I'm really in love with again, I come from a big family. My Uncle Jeffrey's singing, and he sings in New York, so he resides between there and Jamaica. He's part of a choir. And every time he sings, I would cry. So he came to visit when it was my mum's 75th birthday. And he'd stay at our house. And I remember recording him, putting my phone on the stairs, because he'd sing every morning. And without fail, I'd be like in tears. So originally, I wanted to go out to New York and record him and then have that part of the event. It didn't happen. I was really fortunate that myself and the gallery found these amazing singers to sing these particular songs. And one of my brothers, as I said, he played them all the time, and those were his favourite songs. So I wanted to kind of... Originally, it would be Jeffrey's voice. I'm so sorry, the mic. Originally, it would be Jeffrey's voice, and it's so rich, and it's just so moving. But yeah, we still got amazing singers.
Yeah, and because for me, what was fascinating for me, because on the one hand, it is that thing of, I grew up on the Lovers Rock and the slow jammies and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, all that, like Carol Thompson and all that kind of stuff from back in the day, and there is that understanding that and some of my favourite soul singers like Curtis Mayfield, all these kind of falsetto singers, there is that thing. But so I was looking what fascinated me and interested me in having this piece for the show was not only is it produced by yourself, you know, a woman, and so that idea, if we go back to the idea of gender, for me it was about, to deconstruct our understandings of masculinity, you have to bring in the black woman into the conversation, because if you don't do that, then you are not getting the fullness of what we're talking about in terms around gender. We're kind of going to this binary understanding. So I was fascinated by your positionality by selecting these men to sing this song, sing these female songs, them coming from gospel background, singing secular tunes. So it had all these, not contradictions, but had all these kind of points of crossover, intersections, and I just found it fascinating. On top of that, our original intention was to have it as a performance in the space. But then we had the pandemic, and then it becomes this thing on repeat in the gallery space. So I don't know what the question is in there, but how does it become, how does it change for you from being a one-off experience to then becoming this digital on a loop thing in the space? Has it become something else in that process?
Yeah, the one-off experience would be my go-to, because I'm quite interested in that idea of fable. You know, you have to be there, and then you make up your own story around it, and people who missed out are then told that story. So, you know, it goes on, quite cyclical. But instead, with this piece, we decided, well, I was having an interesting time. I decided to show what happens back of house. So it's not polished. There were some cuts which aren't the best cuts in the world. There's moments where you can see the amazing singers have, there's like little glitches, or you see them conversing with each other, laughing, rearranging. So things that you don't normally see. So having that on repeat, well, I guess it's kind of fun for me, but usually whenever I try and present things, they're usually polished. So this was a different way of...
Must have been quite hard.
Yeah.
But that's the beauty of what you're talking about, because if we're talking about going back to this idea of binary identities, singular, you know, that was it. Aditya talks about the single story. If you can, so that if we're thinking about that, by, as you're saying, by adding those pieces, people start to see a more rounded idea of who these people are, not just as performers, but as, you know, beyond the performance, you're seeing their characters, and then if we're going by this issue around Black British masculinities, it is, you know, is a lot of the time it's that first, you know, that initial and that assumptive position that we're judged in, that singular moment. And we don't get to have the conversation or even any of that, so they don't get to see that. So that's what I found really fascinating by how you've treated the material, by showing the three-dimensional, literally in those boxes, even though they're kind of in those frames, but you're moving between those frames, the camera moves around the space, faces and hands and all that kind of stuff. So you're getting a sense of who these people are. And that's what I found really important about the piece, and that the piece was made by yourself, because you definitely bring a different perspective to what our understandings of what gender, sexuality, culture, and all of those things are by doing that. I don't know if anybody have any... you've seen the pieces, and what's what's your take on it? Anybody's got any?
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, because I've done a couple of gallery tours now, and that's been often, I almost feel like, because it's interesting that you said you were originally going to do it as a live performance, because almost the fact that it plays on loop, it's almost like a siren's call, and when moment people hear it as they're coming up the stairs, it draws people in. And as I've noticed, when people come in and they see the performance, it's really interesting to know that originally potentially that part of the gallery and that part of the exhibition probably wouldn't have existed if you'd had it ideally how you wanted to have been. But I think that piece was one of the first things that caught my eye when I went into the space. Obviously because it's sound, so naturally you're drawn to it anyway. But like just seeing the vulnerability of, there's something about a group of men singing. I don't know what it is that I find kind of emotional, and it was very vulnerable as well, especially because they're singing in that slightly higher, like falsetto range. I remember when I had a conversation with you a few weeks ago, in the run up to this, we were talking about everyone's work and the pieces, and like falsetto is, I guess, like the connotation that it has, especially in like wider pop music. It's something that's always been ever present, and it's got quite a sexual connotation as well. Like especially, I think when I did the tour earlier, I was talking about like the Bee Gees, and there's many other groups and examples of like male groups that seem to always use like high falsetto ranges. So it's just really interesting to see that, but the way that it's been dressed up in that gospel environment, something that's traditionally like, you know, seen as more, I guess, patriarchal, or you know, a bit more, I guess, straight. So yeah, no, I feel like that piece is something that's really sort of spoke to me, and I thought it was beautiful. It was great. I really feel unfortunate I haven't seen it live, because it must be great. Yeah.
It's something to behold.
I think they're kind of sick and tired of singing this song, because I keep like saying, oh, I might be doing this here, and they're like, oh well. But yeah, it would. Yeah, I always think about other male singers who sing, and I always go back to like Maxwell. We had that chat earlier. Maxwell singing about this woman's work, Kate Bush track, and within it how it evolves, and he goes high, and then you actually, right at the end, in the live version, I believe, you actually hear his like, you know, his natural kind of tone, natural tone. But then when we were talking about Adele, we're going to put her in. But I can't remember if there's an individual on YouTube, I think his name is Lloydist or something like that. And have you seen it? Someone did a gasp, I thought I heard that. But yeah, he's singing one of Adele's latest tracks from her album, and how he goes really high. And I don't know, it's just something that's really magical about, male singers, individuals who are presented as male, just taking on that, internally ingesting that kind of emotion that sometimes you can kind of take for granted for women singers. And yes, maybe it goes back to, you know, you were saying about that Black Britishness, it being male, but then ingesting it and then presenting it in a different way. Unfortunately, sometimes it does give it more weight, but then you kind of, I don't know what the word is, recalibrate that. Gives you a different understanding of it, perhaps.
And I think, if you're thinking, I think it's that bringing that cultural flavour to the British scene by singing that way. Okay, there is a tradition in church, in European churches, that and opera and all, you know, that folk, what's it called, castrato and all that kind of, you know, back in the day. Yeah, that was that kind of high, and also in the church as well. You have those that, you know, that kind of singing. But I think with from a gospel or a R&B background, that style of singing comes with that unashamed being able to kind of perform in this particular way, you know, as I said, like people like Curtis Mayfield, and I can think of Prince, who can move from right up there down to, you know, he can do the Barry White as much as he can do that kind of soprano singing, that voice. So I think that's what I have respect for in terms of black culture, that is able to provide the space for that to happen and enable that to happen in the church and outside the church, and that's what I really, that's what really kind of drew me to the piece. And that was what was fascinating me about why is this. And I was watching the performance when I was watching. I was like, why is this really, affecting me in a way that I hadn't, other performances haven't before, and seeing it in the gallery space. I think that was the other thing, seeing that kind of, you know, that kind of performance. And I suppose because I was really in love with Anita Baker back in the day as well. It's one of my favourite tunes. So it's like, yeah, it was all of those things that kind of attracted me to the whole piece. So I have to totally commend you. And the other thing that I was going to say to you as well is that your work is displaying it with Keith Piper and Marlene Smith.
Big hitters.
So again, it's about what the intention, my curatorial intention, and then I'd be interested to hear what you think about that, was to have that, because in part of my research has been about that, what we talk about, the conjuncture, like a particular period of time. So I'm looking at the 70s, the late 70s, when the Black Art Group came into, even though Keith's work is after that time, but the work is an iteration of previous works. So I wanted that work to have, that past work, to have a conversation with currentness. And, you know, so you have that, and then you have Marlene's piece, which is also a new piece of work presented in that way. So I wanted to have that conversation, past and presently, talking around gender and sexualities and all that kind of thing within that space, and histories and that. So I don't know, what did it mean anything particular to you in terms of what those works said to each other, or how they kind of respond to each other in any way?
That's a good question. Well, as I said before, big hitters, so it's a little bit intimidating being so in close proximity to them. Then obviously within Marlene's piece, towards the end, you can hear the vulnerability in her voice. When she then takes on the song and sings it, and that kind of gentleness, I guess, kind of juxtaposed with mine in a way. It's not quite the same, because because within the choir, there isn't a forcefulness, but there's a moment in Marlene singing where you can hear there's like a slight crack, which I find quite beautiful. With Keith's, I have to try and make sure that I'm always going to be an admirer of Keith Piper's work. So I can't say any more about it.
I think Keith's piece was so important for this show, because I remember it from I've seen it on so many occasions, and what I like about Keith's work, and it's always fascinates me with his practice, that he has a particular style that provides this. He's able to kind of use that particular style then to move us through the time, and he's kind of hit some really important notes within that piece, because because he uses popular cultural but historical images. And what we have either side of his work is the popular culture, and the popular culture of what Marlene's performing to. You have that conversation again of that perception of blackness through popular culture, that understanding that we're going to understand your culture through this, or kind of create your identities through this lens of popular culture, or like those identities are also formed through that lens of popular culture, because it like gives use of certain popular cultural figures, but also our susceptibility to being part of the mechanism of capitalism, even because we become victims of that as black bodies, become that part of that kind of commodity within that as well. So you're having that there's a narrative within there that with Marlene's piece that talks of the movement from the Caribbean to the UK. There's a movement in Keith's work as well. And there's a movement as well within that, R&B culture that moves from the Caribbean or from the Americas to the Caribbean to the UK. So you're having that, we're always part of that what do you call it, Black Atlantic, that movement, and viewed through a particular kind of popular cultural lens at times, and commodified within that.
I'd also say with Keith's work, there is a particular aesthetic in how he presents that popular culture. Like, I'm interested to see his show that is coming up next year, to see new works from there. But was it Banker's Bones? That was a Blue Coat, just continuously staying loyal to that aesthetic and how he presents his work.
Yeah, and before I go, because that's one of the things that I really want to talk about is the aesthetic in all of the practices and all of the works, because historically, black art or art that's created by black artists have been viewed from a lot of the time from a political position, looking for that political message, looking for the message over the aesthetics and the quality of the work. So how do we make sure, or how do you balance that as artists? Balance making sure that it looks the aesthetic quality is there, but also then if you have, because you could say that everything personal is political, so everything becomes political. But because of that, the way in which black work has been sometimes critiqued or interrogated for a political message, so the beauty and the quality of that work gets overlooked because the search is to ensure that the political message gets put across. So either if you want to go for it now, but have a think about it, because my neck is I need to farm it out a bit. So Chantelle, James, ABC, you've been doing some sterling work, and I've missed the opportunity. I really wanted to be, but I went on this crazy journey this morning, circumnavigating. But I hear that the tours have been interesting. But before we get to that, what is ABC, and how do you do your what is ABC? Yeah. Tell us about that, and how do you do your work? What is it? What's it about? What's it about?
Well, ABC stands for All Black Connect. So we're a youth collective that's based here at New Art Exchange. It's centralising around young people who are black. So that's 18 to 30, I think is the age range. Everyone comes from a variety of different backgrounds. Some people are art students, some people work full time, so on and so forth. And we basically come together to do like book clubs. Sometimes, I myself or Chantelle as well have like chaired Q&As with other prominent creatives. At present, I can't talk too much about this, but we're potentially going to be putting together a quarterly art magazine as well.
Cool.
More on that to follow. Yeah, so that's kind of what we do, really. We meet here every few weeks, do some workshops with other prominent creatives. Most of that more recently has been, obviously, in relationship to the top secret project that we're working on, which I just mentioned. But yeah, I don't know if Chantelle, you've got anything to add to that, but that's a pretty good roundup, I feel.
Yeah, no, I think so. I guess, yeah, we're trying to speak on like the contemporary Black experience, but maybe like in an, I don't know. I wanted to say like in an expanded way, but yeah.
But so how did you get involved in ABC? How did you get involved?
I moved back to Nottingham last year, and I came to a Black networking event here at NEE, and was kind of like recruited.
Okay.
Yeah, and then obviously like lockdown hit, and then started doing some stuff online. But yeah, so we've kind of been like dabbling over the year, and then this is really the first time we're actually getting to like, or for me anyway, like to be working with the collective like in person together on projects.
Yeah. And yourself, James, you don't come from, you're not from an art background.
No, I'm completely out of my depth. What did I do? So I ended up getting involved with All Black Connect because, I'll make this short because I could go on for a while. I originally went out to Nigeria a few years ago, and then came back from that experience wanting to do sort of more community-based just stuff in my general life, because I've just finished uni, wasn't sure what to do. So I ended up doing a lot of kind of like Q&As with people from in and around Nottingham, mainly talking about their practice. So it would be with, you know, I did a Q&A with artists, musicians, activists, but it was all centering around how their racial identity intersected with their work. So obviously, being mixed race myself, I was interviewing a lot of people from the Black community in Nottingham. So I was doing that a bit, and then I ended up somehow just naturally, because Nottingham was quite a small place, somehow meeting Jade, who oversees the project, and she kind of recruited me, and here we are today.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. And do you find that being part of the collective, aside from whatever you do individually, what kind of, how does it work in terms of providing a platform or a support mechanism for you as an individual to flourish?
Like personally, because like the part of Nottingham that I'm from is like fairly middle class, and it's quite traditionally like a white centric part of Nottingham. So growing up, I haven't really, like my group is very multicultural. But I haven't really had a lot of Black peers growing up, to be honest. And the Black side of our family, they all live down in London. And I don't know why it happened, but there was a large part of my childhood, but we didn't really go down there so often. So it wasn't until really I was about 16 or so that I sort of reconnected with that side of my heritage when we started going back down there as a family for Christmas and so on. But I think being a part of this group has, I guess, given me some comfort, because it's enabled me to make friends and with other people that have similar shared experiences, and that's been really comforting and like definitely boosted my confidence. So that's for me like one of the best things I've gained from being part of All Black Connect, is like being able to relax and not feel as though I have to put on a persona or be somebody else, and just kind of be myself and enjoy who I am and learn a bit more about who I am and what I'm capable of doing.
Sure.
So, yeah.
No, that's really, and is that, what's been your experience?
I think for me it was like good to come back to Nottingham and like, yeah, find like a Black community to be part of, because I've been in Manchester studying, I did an art degree, and then yeah, being able to come here and like have people to have conversations about art with, like, yeah, because I didn't really know many people when I moved back to the city, so it's been a really good space to kind of have critical conversations and kind of keep that flow going after graduating, because it can be really easy to just like drop out and but nothing's happening.
Drop out and burn out.
Literally. So yeah, it's been a good space for that, and I guess to be like developing my own practice and kind of getting different opportunities within like the arts.
Good. And because I probably mistakenly described you as an activist group, but is that wrong? Would it be wrong of me to, or is that part of some of the things that you do, is like, or even how do you see activism as being part of that? What is activism anyway? We'll get
I think, I don't know if we'd overtly describe ourselves as activists. I mean, I wouldn't, but I think there naturally is part of it. I think it's kind of that thing of like, just by being alive and living and eating and breathing, that's kind of activism in a way, you know. So in that sense,
No, I understand, because I suppose it's like, if we think of the times that we're in, I'm just trying to ease back, because I know that there's always that kind of, I'm kind of I'm the conduit, but I'm also the block between the two. So there's always, I think the times that we're in, you know, certainly in the past couple of years, and or even further, if we think back to the Black Art group of the 1970s and what was happening back then, you know, from the Black People's Day of Action in response to the Deptford fire, and people marching, and all the insurrections that have happened in the 80s, and currently that idea of blackness having to challenge the state that we're, you know, the state that we're in society in itself. It is that thing then that, you know, in the current time, with things like Black Lives Matter, for young people, I think, and this is why I was saying about this idea of 21st century, what, you know, invariably then when young black or people of colour, black people are involved in the arts in a particular way, then there's like wondering whether activism is part of that process. But I really like what you said, in that everything that you do sometimes is there is a quiet activism or or a more kind of, you know, determined activism within that. So I like that understanding. And so with the tours and the work that you've been doing, how is that? Have you found that process? Not just, is it just that exhibition, or you've been working between both the exhibitions and the space at the same time? You've been working between both exhibitions with the tours. This is to both of you as well. Have I been working in between, as in like laced and or was it just So have you been working through both of the exhibitions? Yeah. And how's it been? What's that experience been like, to kind of talk through the work?
I mean, it was kind of, I think from my point of view, again, not having like a really big art background or anything, it was a bit nerve-wracking for me. I've mainly been focusing on cut and mix. So I've done a few gallery tours for that now, and for me it was a chance to actually, I guess, to try and attempt to get a deeper understanding of why the art is created, what it means, and how I can relate to that. And also, by doing the tours, how can I, am I capable of conveying those things to people who may be in a similar position to me? So for me, it's been a real, I guess that's why I feel like quite comfortable being here now and speaking to the rest of you, because it's been a real confidence boost, and it's let me kind of be like, actually, you know what? Just because I've not gone to art school or I can't draw or do things like that doesn't mean that I'm excluded from the conversation. I mean, I don't know your backgrounds as artists as well. Like, did you guys go to art school or anything like that? Or?
No, I'm joking.
I don't know. But for me, it's like giving me a bit of a lift, because it's like, actually, yes, I can be part of the conversation, and that I can. Well, everyone was saying earlier today I did a good job. So I don't know. Yeah.
Good.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, certainly.
That was a good question. Have we gone to art school and stuff? You can answer that. Yeah. But going back to like Ian's point, because I have made a couple of notes. So where do you see yourself within the work? That's upstairs at Oh, sorry. God. Could you see your face there? I shot myself with that question as well, don't I?
What does that mean? As in, like, you know...
Artist in you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's to both of you, actually. Where do you see
okay.
yourself within the works? It's
Oh,
up to you. Yeah,
Yeah,
where do you...
yeah.
So in terms of like mixed and laced, where do you see yourself within the work?
Okay. I guess the place that I see myself the most, especially with, I guess you're here now as well, so I can talk to you about it, is the chainmail piece. Cool. That was something that kind of straight away I connected with. That's probably, if that's the question that you were hoping, the answer that you were hoping for, like which piece do I kind of relate to the most in a sense? Just because, like I sort of alluded to a minute ago, kind of grown up in a maybe more segregated part of the city, and in general, growing up not eating like Ghanaian food or not having like Ghanaian dialects spoken around me, growing up and just kind of associating more with the Leicester part of my heritage. I think the chainmail and the symbolism that I got from it, and that act of like by wearing it, you're putting up a shield, but also kind of restricting your ability to be free and interpret and move, kind of reminded me of like the way that I've tried to put on a cloak to like code switch and exist in different spaces and kind of get by. So that was like, I guess for me, the place where I kind of see myself most.
Yeah. I think, can I jump in?
Yes.
One thing I think was really
quiet.
interesting as well. One thing I think is quite interesting as well when we're talking about black masculinity. For me, it's not black men, it's black masculinity, right? And blackness and masculinity have a really interesting relationship. But also, I think when you're talking about 21st century blackness and black metal, all that stuff, I think what's interesting is as there's more mixed race people coming now, then I guess the lines get a bit more blurred as to black and white and stuff, which I think is quite interesting. And it requires us to ask more interesting questions as to how we're defining ourselves. Because I guess with you, your ideas of what a black man was or what that meant to be is also going to be quite interesting as you grew up for most of your kind of formative years, and you know, coming into being a young man yourself. Even if you were black or white or Ghanaian, eating Ghanaian food, you'd still be having those questions of who am I, where do I belong? But then you're in a place where aesthetically, you know, with that afro, there's not many people that would be rocking that kind of shit. And so you've got these questions, and it was interesting because I went through that period of time in Cambridge as well, and I was lucky because I had, you know, a grounding in black culture and stuff, but at the same time, you're still looking out and thinking, okay, what does that mean? Or, you know, with this new body that I've got now, what does that mean? Who should I be? So I was just interested to see how you navigated that, and was there a lot of turmoil or struggles, or how you even relating to it now? Because it's a lifelong thing, right? So, yeah, how's that been?
Yeah, I think for a long time I was sort of, I didn't really know. This is why when I went to Nigeria for a time, that was quite a big eye-opening experience, because I think, like, not really being very, what's the word I'm looking, exposed to that kind of Ghanaian heritage. Going over to Nigeria, I had all these sort of preset ideas of how it would feel and what it would be like, and finally thinking, oh, maybe I'll feel a bit of acceptance here. Maybe I'll feel a bit of, you know. And then I went over there, and it was interesting because although it's a majority black country, and obviously, you know, clearly my skin tone is a little bit different, I thought that I would assimilate a bit easier over there. But actually kind of the opposite thing happened, and I became like an outsider there as well. Like everyone that I interacted with, because I'd stayed with a family whilst I was there, they were all sort of saying, oh, but you're a white guy. Which is kind of strange for me, because I thought, oh, maybe I'm going to go over there and I'll be, you know, I won't be the odd one out, but I kind of still was. So I kind of, that time I like wrote a little bit about that and about my experience there, and that's kind of what led me to when I came back to Nottingham. Like, this is something that I didn't realise how long, and this was actually kind of subconsciously going on in my thought process, and then just that experience of being in Nigeria for quite a few months, and yeah, kind of realising actually where do I belong here? I need to figure this out. So that's, I don't know, I guess that's one of the key ways that came to a head, really, is the time I went to Nigeria for some. Yeah.
So it's interesting that you say that it's going to be a lifetime thing, because it was going to be that question then. So because like what you've described is other people telling you who you are.
Mm-hmm.
What do you tell yourself about who you are? What do you say? How do you describe yourself? Or are you still in that? Are you still in that process?
I mean, yeah, this is weird because I feel like I'm quite clear on who I am, to be honest. Like, I identify as like mixed race. I'm half British, half Ghanaian. I don't know. This is why I find it interesting that I get a bit like in a muddle and feel kind of like I don't belong anywhere, because inside of myself I feel like I'm quite clear on who I am. So I don't know. I mean, does the road get any easier, guys?
No, it doesn't.
Good.
No, it doesn't. It's because this question, where we started off is like, Mercer was talking about it for the when the Black Art Group came, and like, so when black youths were growing up as the first British-born black youths, of which I'm part of that generation. We were known as West Indian. We were West Indian. We weren't even British. It's like, where is West India? Where are you talking? West Indies?
West India.
West India. Yeah, where is West India? I've not even been there. I didn't go there until it's like, but my folks are from there. But so this is always the thing that he was saying, that black couldn't be conjoined with British, and we're still in that thing now. If you come on, look at what's happened, despite the amount of adverts now that feature. Every other advert's got a black face in it now, which is like, seriously?
Yeah, I noticed that over the last year. All of a sudden, they just started appearing. Me and my mum were just watching the telly, just going, "Oh, they're doing it again."
Yeah, it's a crazy thing. So so you'll give this veil of acceptance, but when it comes to who we are, there's still there's
it's not safe, innit?
It's not safe. It's not safe, and it's even in like that idea of. I was thinking, on my way here, I was thinking about the vulnerability that we have is when we're in transit, when we're moving between spaces. There is still that vulnerability that we put ourselves in through at times when we're moving between spaces and cities and even streets. And you think of the black youths growing up and how the territory in which they're able to navigate now is partly defined by some of the craziness around postcodes and violence and blah, 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 but also then in terms of how, whether it be the capital that we have, but also in terms of our thinking as to where we can imagine ourselves and where we can get to, So that whole, constantly when I'm travelling, I'm always thinking about the vulnerability of blackness and when you kind of moving between spaces. So I kind of wanted to go back then to the exhibition. So what has it been like for people? What have they? I'm not farming for gold. I'm looking.
Say how good it is.
No, I'm looking to see whether in terms of your interpretations of the work, has that resonated with people, and is that the case? Then have you found that to be the case?
I think one of the best parts of the exhibition that people have really enjoyed was the section with Fanny Cody's photography, especially the way it's been set up. It's at the in order to get to that space, you have to walk through the rest of the exhibition anyway. So it's almost like this, and it's because it's separate and it's cut off, and the lighting in there, and obviously the colour of the walls as well. It's very. Sounds a bit la-di-da saying this, but spiritual. Do you know what I mean? It feels like very meditative, like being in that space. So people have really resonated with that, especially when I told them that obviously the pictures were produced in the 80s. A lot of people, even when I first walked in there and I looked and it said 1989, I believe, I thought, wow, it just doesn't feel as though it was something that was produced almost, God, I'm not doing my maths, but a long time ago. Do you know what I mean? How current they are, and
40,
So that's something that's really struck people. Whenever we get to that part of the exhibition and I go, right, we're moving here now, you can see everyone goes, oh gosh, this is something. And it's really good to see people take the time to actually study each piece and look at the photograph. And you can see that after we've done the talk and stuff, we normally just sort of say, oh, has anyone got any thoughts? And it's always that section of the exhibition that people straight away sort of cling on to and want to talk about, which is really good. I don't know if you've got anything to add.
I haven't really seen people. I haven't really been at NAE very much lately, but I suppose, like, for me, I really love that section of the exhibition, and I really like Michael Forbes' work. I guess, that both pieces for me are just, like, so undeniably, like, queer, like, in aesthetic, and it's something I've really related to, and it's really excited me when I see them.
So, is that something that you do within your own practice then? Is that about, do you bring that out in your own practice?
To be honest, I mean, not like intentionally, it's like there, I guess, just by that being who I am, and that's the perspective that I come from. But it's like, mostly my work's like more to do with like ecology.
Oh, right.
So, yeah, it's not something I'm specifically kind of focusing on.
Okay, that's interesting. No, that's really interesting actually, because that's another conversation. But okay, how are we doing for time? Wow, okay, we've got about 15 minutes. Do we?
We don't have any
Cool. All right. So I kind of want to go back to this couple of things. It was about the political and the aesthetics, because I think within the work of the exhibition, and each of the artists, you bring, a level of beauty to the work. But then, if we're looking at it from a historical point of view, if we frame it within that understanding of black art, it's always been, what's the message? And then look for the message more than the quality, the beauty. How do we balance that, and does the work in the show give that balance, would you say? And how do you balance it, and does the work do that? And is it still important to have a political message, a social, is it still important? Or does black art have to have a political or social message in it? Can it just be, can we just make art for art's sake? Go into that too. I don't want to go into that territory, but
I still think that people look for the message within the work of black artists. The way in which a number of artists have been framed, or how the works have been read in various publications. I'm not sure whether it would be lovely if we could just make work for art's sake and it be read in that way. But I think for me, although sometimes when people have come across my work, they've been really surprised that it's like, oh, it's you. Maybe because my name is Beverley Bennett. It's like quite an English, British name or whatever, and then they're like, oh, okay. Sometimes people also think that because Beverley can sometimes be a man's name, they're like, oh, But I think, obviously, me being a black woman and being fortunate that quite a number of my friends who are amazing artists, that I have that privilege of going away from that kind of entry point and knowing how people make work and why they make work, because again, I've been privileged to have conversations with them. I'm exceptionally lucky in that way, but I do think that sometimes when you're invited to make work or go and work with different institutions, you're ticking a certain box, and you're like, okay, you can potentially get this audience in, or we can hit this kind of agenda. Just being really honest, that's how it feels at this moment in time, and especially, you alluded to the pandemic that we're in. You know, when we were on lockdown, there was quite a number of institutions who wanted to work with individuals, who work with community, and not just people, but community, and helping them with their agenda. I've experienced that, so yeah, we bring a lot. We're fortunate, you know, we're amazing people, we make amazing work, but we're just not, there isn't that fairness, I sometimes feel. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. And do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, it's not looking for the message, it's looking for a specific, like, I guess everyone's quite stuck in a certain paradigm of what black art is about or what black people are and stuff, and we're still quite stuck in that. But also I'd even say myself as a black person and other black people as well, we're all reading from a similar songbook because we're all British in that sense, right? So we've been socialised here, but we all play different characters, so we're all looking for that, that does it. And that can be really frustrating, you know. So with the chainmail, there's a lot of layers, and I really think and implicated. But in some spaces, all people read is, oh, he's talking about slavery, and that's it, because there's chains in a black body, and that's it, you know. And I feel like it's quite a nice challenge, you know. I think, you know, with the arts, yes, we make arts for art's sake, and we're all predisposed to have to create, but at the same time, it's also a craft that we hone, right? So we have to understand our audience, understand the message, understand what we're trying to do, and obviously you don't have control. As soon as it's out there, it grows on its own, but still just trying to craft it, say, all right, I made that one, that's how people read it. Bit like baking, okay, I'm going to put a little less salt in it this time, let me see if I can do this. And there's something nice about that challenge, and sometimes you go really down and frustrated. You spent 2 years on a piece and all people can see is one thing and the other elements aren't open. That's frustrating. But then you get back on it and you start thinking, right, how do I hone it and revise it and refine it? And I think sometimes it makes, at least for me so far, and I know that like past me is like, why the hell are you saying this? But sometimes that has forced me to really go back to the drawing board and think, right, who exactly am I trying to speak to? What exact conversations, and like focus on an audience rather than saying, oh, it's just art that I want to make for myself. Because there's always an audience. And in a lot of these art spaces, there's a very specific audience that we make our art for, you know, consciously or subconsciously. So now I can start thinking, right, these people didn't get it. What am I trying to say and who am I trying to say it to? And then you can start kind of working back from that. And that's where my work, I think, is getting more powerful when I'm thinking more about that audience and what I'm trying to say. But also, seeing as we've got 15 minutes, I'm just going to add another little note, which is something that's on my head at the moment as well, is being mixed race. I think that's a very specific experience, which is interesting. And being a mixed race man as well is quite fascinating. And recently, so I've got a white partner, which in itself is interesting. We're going to do some talks about that another time, which is fascinating. But you know, this whole black man, white woman thing is interesting, right? Anyway, but you know, when we're talking about a black experience, how long do I have in a black experience? You know, what part of the black experience am I there? So when I have children, if I have children with a white woman, if they come out white, like, is that it? Is the black kind of experience done? Or am I even able to really claim that in a certain way? Because there's, you know, there's a lot of access differences when you're mixed. You know, you've still got white heritage. Half of your whole ancestry is white. And obviously in a white context, you feel more black. But actually when you're in a black space, there's different access and you know, a lot of the first black people to do stuff are mixed race people with white parents, you know. So even that in itself is interesting, obviously, because I like implicating myself and saying, where am I in this? These exciting questions. But yeah, I think for me that was fascinating, and also like we're talking about black masculinity, not black men. The relationship of blackness in a female form, and how masculine that makes that female. You know, there's been a lot of talk amongst black men about not finding black women attractive because they're too masculine. You know, because blackness is associated with masculinity. Speaking to some of our friends growing up, black women, and as appearing like a black guy in Cambridge, with white girls, that was a bit like, oh, you know, black man, you know. Whereas a lot of my friends who were black women, the white boys were, oh, you're, you know, yeah, you're pretty, but you're black. It's you know, it's a whole different relationship, which I found quite interesting. And I feel like for me that the exhibition kind of talks on that a bit, you know, that relationship between race and gender as well.
That's and that was always the intention to kind of problematize that whole where it's situated, where it's who is able to embody that idea, but also then, as you said, to kind of call into question what that construct of gender or sexuality means, and even the construct, and certainly construct of race, because you know, I think just to say with I think that analogy that you use in terms of, as you know, as generations go on, how far away are you from your
non-black experience? I guess,
but equally, if you think of like black children that, you know, who no longer have an association with like the Caribbean or the African continent because, you know, their parents and their parents' parents were born here. Right. So they've got no connection or association. The only association is through the culture.
And like the grandparents.
Yeah. And that so.
And this romanticization of that place.
Yeah. So I don't know if you want to do. Is that something that you're experiencing more, or is that something
That's something that I definitely think about a lot and comes into my work because, like, I'm mixed race. I was like raised by like my black mum. Like, I have nothing to do with like the white side of my family. So like culturally, like I've been like a product of my family, like my black family only. So it's been a really weird kind of like dislocating like experience from like multiple angles. But then like my mum being born here and like she's never been to Jamaica, I've never been to Jamaica, and like my granddad's from Jamaica, so it's like everything we know about being Jamaican is from my granddad. And it's just a very dizzying and strange position to be in. And then like just this like feeling of being disconnected but also being seen as a certain thing by other people. And then like I guess what like James was saying about like people, or like you were saying as well about people kind of projecting an identity onto you, but then like what can you what can you claim, and like what's like your birthright in a way. Like I don't know, I have so many thoughts about this.
That's the you know, because like the last thing that I've put down here, because it was one of the considerations, one of the questions that I kept was asked of me when kind of constructing the exhibition was what is at stake. So going forward and thinking if we're going to wrap this up, because are we in that kind of wrapping up time? Yeah, we've got a few minutes. What is at stake, you know, in going forward in the 21st century? Because like for the exhibition, what was at stake was, for me, was around the idea of if we stick to these rigid and fixed ideas of around identity, then we're not going to move forward and be progressive and be inclusive as much as we want. You know, if we describe ourselves as black people, we want to feel included. But if we're excluding identities within our own culture, then we ain't getting anywhere fast. So, what is it? What do you regard as being at stake in this present time? And going forward, whether it be culturally, artistically, what's at stake?
Oh, wow.
What's at stake?
A lot. It was interesting the kind of James was talking about seeing the other side of your family equally. You know, both of my parents are Jamaican, so I remember going to Jamaica a number of times, and so you're seen as English. You've probably seen as English there, and you're like, and that's kind of a really odd place to be in. Yet that's, you know, you're half of your parents, that's your heritage, but you can't really consume it in a way, or it's hard to negate. A lot is at stake, but I couldn't maybe, you know, if we had an hour to try and
Yeah, we'll do that afterwards.
figure out what that is. Yeah. Yeah, a lot. And we have to, not have to. A lot is at stake, but that is where archive is quite interesting.
Okay.
Because,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. Amartey, what's at stake? What is
Everything.
at stake? Everything.
Yes.
Yeah,
Everything.
that's true.
Everything's at stake all the time, you know,
Mm.
depending on how we navigate things and understand ourselves. And I think the elephant in the room, or at least what it sounds like from what everyone's saying, same way as, yes, this is about black masculinity, but because of that, it's about black femininity and women. I think also this is about blackness, and so it's always going to be about whiteness. And because it's black Britishness, you know, us being able to navigate our kind of stake here, because when we go anywhere else place, it's clear that we're English or British or whatever.
Yeah.
But actually here we don't get seen as that, and it's hard for us to understand how to accept that part of ourselves as well, you know, because we're constantly confronted with our blackness. But actually how we wrestle our whiteness culturally, or our Britishness, and accept that, or navigate it, or claim it in a way that we can actually be more have more agency in the way it's steered. It's quite an interesting conversation, and an uncomfortable one for me, you know, sitting in more into that. But yeah, I feel like everything's at stake, because the same way that we understand ourselves, or, you know, are confused about how we relate to ourselves, the same way we're confused about how we're going to relate to the rest of the country, and vice versa. And so there's a lot of these fractures and splits that we've all inherited. And I think conversations like this are really quite important in the exhibition, and like expanding our ideas of ourselves to encapsulate all of these opposing identities until we can start sitting down and having a conversation more about we as people on this island, rather than these kind of communities at odds with each other.
Yeah. Thank you. Chantelle, what's at stake? What is at stake?
I don't know if I can answer that.
James?
It's quite loaded. No,
Is it
let's
loaded?
move on.
Yeah?
It is
James,
loaded,
anything to say on that?
I mean, I guess I couldn't pinpoint. I guess for me, I suppose when you asked me that question, I think what I would want to say is more just the kind of times that we're living in.
Yeah.
I guess accentuate the kind of, when you say language, like what's at stake. Do you know what I mean? I feel like that's informed generally by what we witnessed like last year, like everything that happened with obviously George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. There's this language that's very more,
It's like a sense of urgency.
yeah. Everything is now very life and death, and I think that's because there's loads of things that have happened over the last few years that have given us that sense of urgency, like obviously with George Floyd and Black Lives Matter happening, but also the fact that, you know, with Brexit as well, there's that sort of timeline of like, I feel like with Brexit, because we left a few years, well, we voted to leave a few years ago, but we've sort of,
really seen the...
there's been kind of like a timeline of by this date this will happen, by this date this will happen, which, you know, when you're living in a sort of context where you have a set timeline, that sort of, I don't know, I feel like that informs us all to feel as though time is running out and that we need some, do you know what I mean? That gives a sense of urgency as well. And that's why I feel like we're at a really interesting part of history. Maybe in a few years' time we'll look back and go, God, yeah, that's when everything, maybe not changed, but came back into focus, and we reframed things in a certain way. Because for better or worse, because of the pandemic, we've highlighted, again, life and death and our timeline, and that things can run out at the blink of an eye. You know, one minute you're walking down the road, the next minute you go home, you're coughing, and then all of a sudden you're in a hospital bed and so on. You know, these things happen quickly. So I guess it feels maybe, because like you said, Amartey, everything all the time is at stake. It always is, it always has been. But maybe the context that surrounds us at the moment, that's informed by like political things like Brexit, by like traumatic things like George Floyd, and by I guess circumstantial things like the pandemic, have created that sense where it feels about we're running out of time and
Yeah.
everything's, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And climate
Yeah.
change.
Yeah, oh yeah, that
Let's
one
not
as
forget
well.
that one.
Yeah, that one's happening.
What was that?
Climate change as well, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
That's coming back
Oh,
into
yeah.
with COP
Yeah,
26 in
exactly.
Denham.
Yeah.
So there's all these sort of
Mm.
different factors that are melding together that I feel are putting, especially these conversations surrounding race and identity, and especially within the black community, it feels as though we're arming up ready again to sort of, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. There's.
I suppose.
I don't know how we do. Are we got? Is it? Are we?
We're rambling a bit there.
Is that what we do? No, 5 minutes maximum. Okay. Yeah. To do. Oh, right. No, because I agree, but I would say though that.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Do you mind? I don't
Yeah.
mean
No.
to cut you,
Yeah.
but
No.
because
No.
it's 5
Go.
minutes.
Yeah. Cool.
This exhibition
Yeah.
has come off a lot of work, and, you know, a combination of your PhD, and you've been sitting there thinking over lockdown, you've had a lot of time. One question is just, how do you feel it's come across? If you were to do it again, now seeing the exhibition, is there anything that you'd change, or how do you feel about your curatorial...
And another quick question, where do you see yourself in the work?
Oh.
Where do you see yourself within the works?
Where do I see
Yeah.
myself? Well, it's all over that. It's all over the works, because I'll answer Beverley's and then I'll come to
Yes,
that.
right,
But so I it was seeing, having that first conversation with Amartey in Leicester in 2019, I think it was, and we were going to have a quick conversation, and 2 hours later, over lunch, because we always like to eat, it was having those conversations and realising that there was like kindred spirits, and the work spoke to me, that his work spoke to me. And so I see myself in that practice, because it speaks to that, even though Amartey's probably wasn't aware of the Black Art movement or Ratimi, I could see that work in that work. And that was the period that I grew up in. So it spoke to that time. It spoke of that time in a different way. So it was seeing myself in that and seeing that understanding. And then obviously the working with like yourself and Keith and Marlene from the Midlands and connecting with that. Because my intention has always been to bring the focus back here to the UK, to Britain, and focus on art that exists here, rather than us having to reflect and view ourselves through this African-American lens, and because that's where we get conflated, our cultures get conflated through that, and it's like, it's a different thing. So being able to see myself through those works and through that range of different works, that speaks of that lived experience, but that lived experience here that is different to what's happening in the Caribbean, and different to what's happening, because it's come through that process. So I see myself in all those pieces of work because of the conversations that I've had with the artists, like Antonio Roberts' work, you know, those beautiful Raspberry Pi screens, and that is kind of painstakingly kind of put together, but then started kind of talking about this idea of being out of place, you know, and I was just talking about that idea of the journeys that we're constantly on, the journey that I'm on, being out of place, those characters that are out of place. I've felt like that when I've been doing my PhD, you know, just like being out of place when I'm in an academic space. I sometimes feel that way when I'm in this space, sitting here, chairing this conversation. You know, what gives me the right and the privilege to be sat in claiming these titles? It's like sometimes I have to, you know, challenge and question myself as well. So it's all of those things. So that all of those works speak to. But I'm grateful to each of you as artists for the time and consideration that you've given to the work and making it what it is, and for yourselves for bringing your lens and your experience and your knowledge to the work and your interpretation, because it's not a singular thing. It's not a singular thing. And I'm pleased with it, because I think the conversations that I've had with people have been rich and informative. And as I said, it's only my view. Somebody else will have a completely different spin on it. It's only my view. This is what we're trying to to dispel that singular view, that narrow image. But this is my view, but it's open to interpretation, and that's exactly what we need to do. That's what we need to provide each other with, that space to be and realise their full selves. And that's the intention of the exhibition, for people to see the range and breadth and depth of what Black British masculinities can be, what it might mean in this present time, and that's it. So I've really enjoyed it. It's been great. Thank you all. Thank you, James, Chantelle, Amartey, Beverley. Thank you for tuning in.
See you next week.
Cheers to New York Exchange.
Yes,
Thank you for your support. Thank you, guys.